The department head said I wasn't authorised to approve budget cuts. The CEO's office confirmed I'd submitted 3 written warnings about resource allocation 6 weeks before the revenue miss. Someone had told the board I caused the shortfall by making unauthorised decisions. I'm Victoria. I've been working as a project coordinator at a fintech startup for 18 months. I managed timelines, tracked deliverables, and reported directly to the Chief Product Officer. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday. I wasn't invited. Wednesday morning, my manager called me into his office. He said the board had questions about Q2 performance. He said my name had come up. I asked, in what context? He said I'd need to speak with HR. The HR meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. The director was there. So was the Chief Product Officer. They said the board had been informed that I'd made budget decisions without authority. They said those decisions had resulted in delayed product launches. They said the delays had cost the company significant revenue. I asked which budget decisions. They handed me a printout. It listed 3 resource reallocation requests I'd submitted in March and April. All 3 had been approved by my manager and the CPO. I had the approval emails. I didn't mention the emails. I asked if I could see the documentation they'd received. The HR director said that information had come from an internal review. She couldn't share the source. I asked who had conducted the review. She said it was confidential. The CPO said the issue wasn't about the approvals, it was about the timing. He said I should have escalated the budget concerns earlier. I had escalated them, in writing, 3 times. I didn't say that. I asked if we could schedule a follow-up meeting. I said I needed time to gather my records. The HR director said they'd let me know. The meeting ended. I went back to my desk. I opened my email archive. I searched for budget, resources, and allocation. I found everything. March 12th. Email to my manager flagging that developer hours were being diverted to unplanned features. I'd recommended reallocating 2 contractors to maintain the core roadmap. March 19th. Follow-up email to my manager and the CPO. I'd outlined the revenue impact if the Q2 launches were delayed. I'd provided timeline projections. April 3rd. Third email. I'd warned that without immediate resource adjustment, we'd miss the release window entirely. Each email had been acknowledged. Each recommendation had been approved. I saved all 3 as PDFs. I labelled them with dates and recipients. I stored them in a separate folder on my personal drive. Then I went back to work. No one mentioned the board meeting for the rest of the week. No follow-up from HR. No clarification from the CPO. I attended my usual meetings. I updated project trackers. I responded to team emails. On Friday afternoon, I noticed my access to the product roadmap file had been changed to view only. I could see it, but I couldn't edit. I checked the revision history. The permission change had been made that morning by someone in the product team. I didn't ask why. The following Monday, I arrived to find a calendar invite from the head of product, not my direct manager, his manager. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday. Subject line, Q2 review. I accepted the invitation. I spent Tuesday organising my files. I had every email I'd sent about resource allocation. I had every project status update. I had approval confirmations from my manager and the CPO. I compiled them chronologically. I noted which warnings had preceded which decisions. I noted which decisions had been approved by whom. I didn't prepare a defence. I just organised the facts. Wednesday morning, I arrived 15 minutes early to the conference room. The head of product was already there. So was someone from finance I didn't recognise. They asked me to walk through my role in the Q2 budget decisions. I did. I explained that I'd flagged resource constraints in March. I explained that I'd recommended reallocation to protect the core roadmap. I explained that those recommendations had been approved by my manager and the CPO. The head of product asked if I had documentation. I provided the emails, all 3, with approval responses. He reviewed them in silence. The person from finance asked if I'd been authorised to make budget recommendations. I said my role included flagging resource issues and proposing solutions. Final approval rested with my manager and the CPO. She asked if that was outlined in my job description. I said yes. She asked if I had a copy. I did. I'd brought it with me. I provided it. Section 3 listed resource planning and escalation as a core responsibility. The head of product made notes. He said they'd review everything and follow up. I returned to my desk. That afternoon, my manager called me. He asked if I'd spoken to anyone outside the company about the board meeting. I said no. He said it was important to keep internal matters confidential. I said I understood. He ended the call. I checked my project assignments in the shared system. 3 had been reassigned. No explanation, no notification. I opened a new document. I logged the reassignments. I noted the date and time. I saved it with my other records. 2 days later, I received an email from HR. They wanted to schedule a performance review. Not my regular quarterly review, an additional one. The meeting was set for the following week. I didn't respond immediately. I reviewed my last 3 performance evaluations. All had rated me as meets expectations or exceeds expectations. I'd received no performance warnings, no documented concerns. I responded to HR, confirming the meeting time. I spent the weekend reviewing every project I'd worked on in the past year. I documented completion dates. I documented outcomes. I documented any deviations from plan and the reasons for them. Everything was on time or early. Everything was within scope. The performance review was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. The HR director was there, so was my manager. They said they wanted to discuss my communication style. They said some team members had expressed concerns about my approach to escalation. I asked which team members. They said that feedback was confidential. I asked for specific examples of problematic communication. My manager said I had a tendency to escalate issues prematurely. He said it created unnecessary alarm. I asked about the budget warnings from March and April. He said those were examples of premature escalation. I asked if the revenue shortfall had validated those concerns. He said that wasn't the point. I didn't respond. The HR director said they were placing me on a performance improvement plan. 30 days, focus areas, communication and team collaboration. She handed me a document. It outlined weekly check-ins with my manager. It required documented evidence of improved communication practices. I read it. I signed it to acknowledge receipt. I wrote, "Signature indicates receipt only, not agreement with content," next to my name. I took a copy. That evening, I reviewed my employment contract. Section 8 outlined disciplinary procedures. It required verbal warning before written warning. It required written warning before a performance improvement plan. I'd received neither. I made a note. I didn't send it anywhere. The next morning, I attended my first PIP check-in with my manager. He asked how I was adjusting to the plan. I said I was reviewing the communication expectations. He said he wanted to see me copying him on all project-related emails going forward. I said I would. He said he wanted advance notice before I escalated any issues. I asked what constituted escalation. He said anything that might require leadership attention. I asked for clarification on the threshold. He said I should check with him first if I was uncertain. I said I understood. The meeting ended. I went back to my desk. I continued my work. I copied my manager on every email. I didn't escalate anything. A week passed. I noticed my name had been removed from the Q3 planning committee. My calendar invite had been deleted. I checked with the executive assistant who managed the distribution list. She said my manager had requested the change. I didn't ask him about it. At my second PIP check-in, my manager said my communication had improved. He said he appreciated the email transparency. He said he still had concerns about my judgment in resource planning. I asked for specific examples. He said the March and April budget recommendations had demonstrated poor timing. I asked if the approved recommendations had been implemented. He said they had. I asked if they'd prevented additional delays. He didn't answer directly. He said the point was that I'd created unnecessary pressure on leadership. I didn't argue. During the third week, I was asked to hand over 2 of my remaining projects to another coordinator. The reason given was workload balancing. I provided all documentation. I conducted handoff meetings. I answered questions. The projects I'd managed for months were reassigned in 48 hours. I updated my files. I noted the transfer dates. I saved the handoff emails. At my third PIP check-in, my manager said my progress was inconsistent. He said I wasn't demonstrating enough initiative. I asked how that aligned with the feedback about premature escalation. He said I should be finding the right balance. I asked for measurable criteria. He said he'd know it when he saw it. The next day, I received an email from the CEO's office. Not from the CEO, from his executive assistant. The email said the CEO was conducting a review of Q2 performance across all departments. He was requesting documentation of budget-related communications from March through June. The request went to 15 people. I was one of them. I compiled everything I had: the 3 warning emails, the approval responses, the project timelines, the resource allocation requests. I submitted it all through the portal specified in the email. I kept copies. 3 days later, my manager called me into his office. He said the CEO had questions about the documentation I'd submitted. I asked what kind of questions. He said the CEO wanted to understand the timeline of my escalations relative to the board presentation. I said my escalations had occurred in March and April. I didn't know when the board presentation had taken place. He said it had been in early May. I didn't say anything. He said the CEO's office would be in touch. I returned to my desk. That afternoon, I received a meeting request directly from the CEO's calendar, scheduled for Monday morning. The attendee list was just the 2 of us. I accepted. I spent the weekend reviewing everything again. I didn't prepare talking points. I didn't rehearse explanations. I just organized the timeline. Monday morning, I arrived at the executive floor 10 minutes early. The CEO's assistant showed me to his office. He was at his desk. He gestured to the chair across from him. He said he'd been reviewing the Q2 performance data. He said several board members had raised questions about resource allocation decisions. He said my name had come up as the person responsible for budget cuts that delayed product launches. I said I'd made resource recommendations. I said those recommendations had been approved by my manager and the CPO. He asked if I had documentation of the approvals. I provided the emails, the same ones I'd submitted through the portal. He reviewed them carefully. Then he asked about the timing. He asked when I'd first identified the resource constraints. I showed him the March 12th email, the first warning. He asked what response I'd received. I showed him my manager's reply. It acknowledged the concern. It said they'd discuss it in the next planning meeting. He asked if the issue had been addressed in that meeting. I said no. That's why I'd sent the follow-up on March 19th. He read the second email. He asked about the CPO's response. I showed him the approval for the contractor reallocation. He asked about the third email from April. I explained that the timeline projections had shown we'd missed the Q2 window without immediate action. The email had gone to my manager and the CPO. Both had approved the resource adjustment. He asked if the adjustment had been implemented. I said yes. He asked if it had prevented the delays. I said it had minimized them. The core features had launched in Q2. Secondary features had been pushed to Q3. He made notes. Then he asked who had presented the Q2 results to the board. I said I didn't know. I hadn't been in the meeting. He said the presentation had attributed the revenue shortfall to unauthorized budget decisions made by project management. I didn't respond. He asked if I'd made any unauthorized decisions. I said no. Every recommendation had been approved. He asked if I'd been placed on a performance improvement plan. I said yes. He asked for what reasons. I said premature escalation and poor judgment in resource planning. He closed the folder with my documentation. He said he'd follow up. The meeting lasted 30 minutes. I returned to my desk. I had no new assignments, no meetings scheduled, nothing in my queue. I worked on internal training modules. 2 days later, the head of HR called me. She said the CEO had completed his review. She said he'd identified significant discrepancies in the board presentation. She said the information presented to the board had not accurately reflected the timeline of my escalations or the approval process. She said the company was conducting an internal investigation. She said my performance improvement plan was being suspended pending the outcome. I asked how long the investigation would take. She said approximately 2 weeks. I asked if I should continue my current work. She said yes. I went back to my desk. For 2 weeks, nothing changed. I completed training modules. I attended team meetings I wasn't leading. I responded to emails. My manager didn't speak to me unless necessary. On the 14th day, I received another call from HR. The investigation had concluded. The CEO wanted to meet with me again. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. I went to his office at the appointed time. He said the company had determined that the board presentation had contained inaccurate information. He said the escalation timeline and approval process had been misrepresented. He said the person who had prepared the board materials had relied on incomplete information. He didn't say who that person was. He said my performance improvement plan was being withdrawn. He said it would be removed from my file. He said the company appreciated my diligence in documenting the resource concerns. Then he said the startup was restructuring. They were consolidating several coordinator roles. He said my position was being eliminated. He said I'd receive 12 weeks severance, full benefits through the end of the year, a neutral reference letter. He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it. I reviewed the terms. Everything was standard. No non-disparagement clause. No unusual conditions. I asked when my last day would be. He said end of the week. I said I'd review the agreement and respond by tomorrow. He nodded. I took the folder. I left his office. That night, I read the severance agreement 3 times. I compared it to my employment contract. Everything aligned. The next morning, I signed it. I was given the rest of the week to transition my remaining work. There doesn't much to transition. On Friday, I packed my desk. I returned my access badge and laptop to IT. I left the building at noon. The severance payment cleared the following Tuesday. I'd already started looking for new positions. I had 3 interviews scheduled within 2 weeks. One led to an offer. I accepted it. The new company was established, stable. The role was similar, but the structure was clearer. I started 4 weeks later. I never learned who had prepared the board presentation. I never asked. 6 months after I left, I heard through my network that the CPO had resigned. No details, just gone. The company kept growing. They raised another funding round. They hired more people. I saw job postings for coordinator roles, 3 new positions. I didn't apply. The documentation I'd kept was still organised in my files at home. I never needed to reference it again. But I kept it anyway, filed under Singapore 2024.